listeners of the This Month in Fintech podcast. My name is Sasha Pilch, and I'm delighted to have our guest today, Karan, the head of agentic commerce at Adyen.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Great. So there's been some really exciting product launches, especially like within the agentic commerce realm, which is the hottest topic right now in our industry, which is really exciting. But before we jump into that, I'm just going to get to know you a little bit. So you went to Emory and studied economics and political science. You worked at Deer Isle Capital and Novus Partners, and then spent 3 years at Bain as a consultant. Lots of people that I know that have come out of Bain have gone on to do brilliant things. Like I used to work at Plaid, and Zach, the CEO, was ex-Bain. One of my clients now, Turnkey, their CEO, Bryce, is also ex-Bain. So do you feel that that consulting experience has shaped where you are today?
Yeah, I think it definitely helped. I think as a consultant, you kind of get trained to think in a very structured way about ambiguous questions. And that's basically what agentic commerce is, right? It's just a whole lot of ambiguity. So yeah, it definitely helped along the way.
Let's talk about the state of agentic commerce today. So you've now been at Adyen for almost 3 years, and you're heading up arguably the most cutting edge initiative. So what is the state of agentic commerce today?
Yeah, for sure. Let me just set the scene a little bit, right? We're definitely early days, but we're kind of seeing 4 flavors of agentic commerce start to emerge. The first flavor is what we call kind of consumer human in the loop flows, right? Think about going onto Gemini or to ChatGPT or something like that, searching for a new pair of sneakers, and then really doing the discovery as well as the entire purchase directly within that chatbot type interface, right? It's almost like an embedded checkout experience that exists not on a merchant's own website, but on one of these AI platforms. That's kind of the main flavor that we're seeing a huge amount of building in today. That's what protocols like ACP and UCP are also quite focused on. The second flavor we see is what we call consumer autonomous flows, right? That's really kind of some of the magic of agentic commerce. You go out and you say, hey, book me this flight when it falls below, such and such price, or buy me, groceries for the week, and it goes off and kind of does it on your behalf. The consumer kind of sets up the parameters up front, right? The budget, the preferences, the rules, but the agent then goes out and executes on that purchase without kind of needing to come back and get approval every single time, right? We're very early, very nascent on that. There's still a huge amount of kind of rules and infrastructure and regulations that still need to be set up around things like trust and intent, et cetera, right? If you think about what Google announced last year with AP2, that's what AP2 is quite focused on. The third flavor then is machine to machine, right? Think about an agent going out and purchasing things like API access or digital content or compute or something like that, right? It goes off, it purchases it in the background, oftentimes from another machine without a human really necessarily even knowing exactly what's being purchased on the back end, right? If you think about protocols like X402 or MPP, that's where they sit. So very nascent, a huge amount of infrastructure is being built on here, but we're very early. A lot of merchants and businesses are still trying to figure out, how do they even want to take part in that. And then the fourth flavor is what we call B2B flows, right? Where, you're going out and autonomously doing things like procurement or paying out suppliers, stuff like that. Massive TAM opportunity, but it's very, very fragmented and super early. There's not really yet a protocol that exists that tries to solve that yet. So that's kind of the state of the union as to where we are at the moment. A lot of what we have been building so far on Adyen Agentic has been focused on that first flavor, but we are definitely thinking about some of the other flavors as well.
Okay, so where it's at today is clients that you have like Cezanne, I love their clothes, allow people to be in chat or Gemini or Meta AI having natural language conversation about what they should buy and get the recommendation and then buy it then and there within that interface.
You got it. That's exactly right.
And I also read within your recent press release that it's also a universal translator. So it works on those platforms that are currently used by everyone right now, but then whatever comes next it can also work?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, so there's a few points I kind of make on that one. I think the first one is yes, you summarized it all spot on. I think as I mentioned earlier, we're still very much in that first flavor, the consumer human in the loop flavor. The direction of travel is things are going to get more and more autonomous. A lot of things still need to be figured out, but we are very, very early. What we are focused on, right, at Adyen Agentic is we want to make sure that merchants are ready whenever that future state arrives, right? Real-time product data, cart creation and cart orchestration, as well as payments in a way that is safe and secure without having to go out and rebuild from scratch every single time. So this phrase that you used, universal translator, that's basically what our vision is, right? The key design principle here is merchants shouldn't have to go out and start to pick winners this early, right? The actual AI platform landscape is going to look very different 18 months from now, as it did, 6, 9 months ago as well, right? Our job is to give merchants that common layer so that they can integrate once and participate across the ecosystem, regardless of which AI platform or platforms end up winning, right? The analogy here is like, imagine a merchant had to go out and rebuild their website for every single browser, right? That's almost what agentic commerce feels like today. Adyen Agentic really tries to solve for that. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And because we are in this high growth stage, no one knows what's going to be the main platform that we're going to be using for shopping. So the fact that this is so adaptable to anything is like so much less risk and less cost for your customers. So it's a great approach. And so there's three components to it: the feed, the cart, and the payments. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe even before I get into the product, maybe I'll start by just setting the stage, right? Anytime you as a customer or as a shopper, want to go off and buy something on the internet, you kind of go through three steps, right? One is discovery. You go out, today you might be doing it on Google, you might be going on to Reddit and looking up some reviews for whatever you're trying to do. But the first step is kind of product discovery. And already we're seeing a huge amount of disruption to that from AI platforms, where increasingly shoppers are beginning that discovery process on a chat GPT or on some sort of LLM. The second piece then is the cart creation, right? Actually adding something to the cart and going out and making the purchase happen. When you go off and do that, a million and one things start to happen in the background, right? An order management system gets triggered, a loyalty system might get triggered, inventory, fulfillment, shipping, billing, etc. All those things need to happen. And then finally, there's the payment, right? You actually clicking the buy button and having your card details, whatever payment method you're using, getting pulled in and actually having that occur in the background. Also, what's going on in the background is things like risk and fraud, etc., are all also being done on here. Our product suite here, right, Adyen Agentic, is really designed to solve each of those three steps in an agentic world. So the first piece is on the discovery side, right? That's what the agentic feed is focused on, right? It's all about making sure that a merchant's products are visible and usable across agentic environments. It gives the AI platform a kind of structured real-time access to things like catalog, pricing, as well as inventory data. So the agent is working off accurate information. That's what the feed is focused on. The second piece is where the cart now it makes the discovery into an actual merchant-ready checkout, right? It connects the AI experience back into the merchant's existing checkout, tax, fulfillment, order management, etc. stack on the back end. So merchant doesn't have to go out and rebuild their entire commerce stack just for every new AI platform. And then the third piece is the payment, right? That's the trust layer that makes the transaction safe and secure as well, right? It handles things like authentication, tokenization, fraud, risk management, as well as payment routing, so that the merchant can always remain that merchant of record and maintain that direct connection with their shopper. That's kind of what the overall offering is really focused on.
And that last piece about the merchant still maintaining that relationship seems very important, considering like where this could end up going. Like if agents are transacting with other agents, like does the merchant essentially become out of the loop? So it's like good to hear how it's currently working. And why is Adyen uniquely positioned to solve this problem? Like why wasn't it Stripe? Like why couldn't it be Stripe or Shopify or a large bank to have a universal translator?
Yeah, I'd say a few things. I think the first one is just like technical scope, right? I think when all of this started, last year as we were first digging into it, a lot of us thought that the problem or the long pole in the tent would be payments, what we've learned is it's actually much bigger than payments. Payments is actually pretty solvable, right? It requires like orchestration across product data, across checkout, authentication, tokenization, fraud, and then the payment. And then you get to things like acquiring, issuing, settlement, etc., right? Adyen already operates across that entire life cycle through a single global platform, right? All of those foundations that we've been building on for 20 years kind of work really nicely for this new era. Most players often will sit at one level of that stack. We kind of own the entire piece of it. The second piece then was what we call the N times M problem, right? We work with thousands of the world's largest enterprise merchants across every vertical, every geography. That means when we are building Adyen Agentic, we're not solving this for one merchant at a time. We're kind of building that infrastructure that scales across the entire ecosystem, right? Every integration that we do or that we build with an AI platform ends up solving for all of those merchants, right? That also, that while that's very helpful for our merchants, it's also very helpful for the AI platforms, right? Because ultimately, right, if I as a shopper want to start to transact with one of these AI platforms, I need to be able to buy from my favorite sneaker store or my favorite, favorite shoe store, whatever that looks like, right? That N times M problem is also where we're kind of sitting as that ecosystem player. The third piece is neutrality, right? The universal translator needs to be neutral. The structural reality, right? If you go out and take a look at a lot of the other folks that are building on here, they often have their own surface or their own ecosystem or their own commercial incentive to kind of get merchants and consumers inside their own platform. That's just how their business operates, right? Our business, our primary constituents are merchants and helping make sure merchants can transact wherever their customers are. That really means our incentives are super well aligned with where our merchants are. And the final piece is trust, right? This is kind of foundational. Agentic commerce is ultimately going to start to introduce some pretty hard questions around authentication, authorization, as well as fraud at a level that the industry maybe hasn't seen before. Who's authorized the agent to go off and make the purchase? Is this transaction actually legitimate? All of our existing infrastructure, which is built on top of trillions and trillions of dollars worth of volume, that is the foundational layer that this all gets kind of built on, right? It's not a bolt on, it's just kind of the foundation of it.
And that trust piece is such an important topic right now. I did a panel with the new head of fraud at Plaid, Pedro, and Sebastian from Ledger, and Will Turner from HSBC. And we talked about this agentic trust issue. And it seems to be that intent is the underlying factor as to decide whether or not it was a malicious activity or it was like legitimate. I've also had the chief innovation officer of Experian on the podcast recently, and she was talking about, we are in these fast moving, uncertain times where no one knows what the new phase of bad actors and agents gone wild is going to look like. So can you talk a little bit about like how Adyen is battle tested and enterprise grade?
Yeah, for sure. I think so essentially the question is, how does like the existing worldview of fraud actually end up translating to this new piece? Yeah. I think there's a lot to it, right? I think one, this point you've raised around intent is exactly right. Especially as you get past the first flow, right? The consumer human in the loop flow, you prove intent the same way you've always proved intent, right? A human ends up clicking the buy button, right? That's how you do it. When it becomes more autonomous, all of a sudden the intent question becomes a lot more open. I think there's a few different approaches and a few different players who are trying to come in and own that intent layer. And I think that the goal here is we need to work with everyone. From a fraud perspective, we are already seeing, right, all of our models are already trained on, trillions and trillions of dollars of data, as I mentioned before. It's about now adapting those fraud models to be able to figure out, is this a malicious bad bot or is this actually a good agent? Right? Is there some identifier that allows us to figure out who the shopper is that sits behind that agent? Has that agent actually gone out and registered themselves at some sort of registry to make sure that they're actually trustworthy? Those are some of the big concepts that I think we're still grappling with.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Like in a way, like replicating like what we have now, but like for this new agentic world.
Exactly. And of course, it's going to take a bunch of time, right? The reason risk and fraud models work so well today is there's so much data to train them on. Right now, there's almost, if in effect there's almost zero real dollars of transaction volume across the ecosystem, it will take time for those fraud models to actually catch up.
Yeah. All of these scams that we now know to steer clear of were once new and people fell for them. And so we're going to see like a similar pattern. Um, and, you know, you mentioned that this is still very much the beginning. What do you think will be the KPI? Like 3 years from now, what percentage of commerce will happen through agents? Like 1%, 10%? When do you think it'll actually become dominant? I know like it's hard to predict the future, but like just from your expert opinion.
Um, I would say, without getting super specific, right? We went out and we did our own kind of market modeling, and we interviewed, several hundred merchants as we were doing all of this. 5 years or so from now, we expect, call it $2 trillion or so of global e-commerce we expect to be agent influenced in some way. That's not all fully autonomous stuff. That includes things like discovery and recommendation, assisted checkout. But it's a big enough number that it justifies building the infrastructure now versus waiting for it all to be done down the road, right?
What percentage is that 2 trillion?
I think when we were doing the numbers, I think somewhere between, call it like 8 to 12%, somewhere in that sort of a range. The other point to raise here is that the actual penetration is probably going to be quite different depending on the vertical and the geography that you're looking at, right? Categories that have a ton of decision complexity, right? Things like consumer electronics or travel or fashion or some ports of B2B procurement. Those might end up getting the agentic influence a lot faster than things like luxury goods, where the brand relationship and the tactile experience matters more. Right. Similarly, markets that have a ton of AI penetration or mobile first commerce will probably move faster than others. Right. So I don't think it's going to be one of those things that just happens across the board all at once. It'll probably happen in a phased way. And it'll probably also track back a little bit to that initial framing I said earlier on around the 4 flavors that we're seeing.
Yeah, totally. Because there's enjoyment in like having those experiences of like going into Chanel and like buying a handbag. So yeah,
Absolutely.
we don't want to lose that.
I mean, that's what it is, right? Anything that you as a shopper feel some sort of transaction utility from, what is the job that the agent is really going off and doing for you, right? It's the same reason people love going into stores in person, right? It's not like because you can buy stuff online, you're not going into stores, and I expect that pattern will also emerge again.
Exactly. But then like forgetting to buy like bin bags is like not enjoyable. So having agents being on top of all that stuff makes total sense.
Or another one, right? Like I could find the perfect flight to take tonight, like in 10 seconds, right? From New York to Amsterdam or Amsterdam to back to New York. And then I need to click another 10 times until I can actually make the purchase happen. And many minutes will pass, and I'm getting zero joy as a shopper during those minutes. Those are the sorts of use cases I think we're quite excited about, at least on the consumer side.
It's actually stressful. Like I hate that when I'm like, is this one seat left on the Delta flight going to be there? And then, yeah, I would like an agent to take that off my plate for sure.
Please.
So what about the hardest thing from a technical or regulatory challenge that you think needs to be solved?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think from a technical perspective, I think the biggest challenge right now is not the payment piece, but the trust piece, right? The authorization and the authentication infrastructure that proves that a consumer actually mandated that specific agent to act on their behalf for a specific transaction, right? And that needs to work in an interoperable and quite open way. There's a lot of open questions that still need to be answered. And I mean, if you ask, 5-10 different players in the ecosystem, who has the right to be the ones who should be the arbiter of that, you'll get 5 or 10 different answers as well, which is somewhere where I think regulators will have to start to think about quite a bit as well. The other piece on the regulation side is there are a lot of key questions still, right, around things like consent, liability, data use, and consumer protection, right? Who's responsible if the agent makes a mistake, right? Who's actually on the hook for that? what actually constitutes like a valid consumer authorization, right? This stuff is, non-deterministic. Is that A or B? There's some gray areas there, I think, that need to be figured out as well. Those questions are not at all answered yet, and how they get answered will end up really shaping how quickly the direction of travel starts to move.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, it's a test and learn thing. We're going to have to figure it out, but we will.
We will for sure, but there's launch fast, there's iterate, and you can and should do that. But there are points also where I think uh, anytime money is moving around, you know, those rules need to be set and folks need to agree to it. Otherwise, things will get very, very messy very fast.
Can we then talk a little bit about Adyen Uplift, your AI product that increases conversion, reduces fraud, lowers costs? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So Uplift is we released Uplift early last year. It's the AI powered optimization layer for the full payments funnel, right? So it kind of sits across all those foundational elements I was talking about earlier on, right? Tokenization, fraud protection, authentication, optimization, personalization, so that you can really optimize the full journey rather than doing it in isolated pieces, right? Oftentimes, a lot of businesses need to figure out, okay, do we want to try to boost up conversion? Do we want to bring down cost, or do we want to try to keep fraud as low as possible? And it's often you can try and optimize for one or two of them, but often at the cost of the other one. Uplift is trying to say, look, what is the full funnel view of this so that you as a business are as best off as possible? So in practice, what does that mean, right? It means things like showing the right payment method for a shopper, right? It means applying the right authentication flow based on the risk context of how risky this particular person is, right? So you're reducing false positives on fraud that would otherwise block legitimate transactions, right? The advantage here, I've mentioned this a couple of times, right? It's all of the payment volume that we've been able to train our models on, right? We did something like $1.5 trillion of payment volume last year. That is a training data that Uplift is trained on. That data scale is something that is very, very difficult to actually replicate at scale.
That's excellent because then you're drawing from all of these billions of transactions over the last 20 years in order to have this offering that for your customers decides that friction versus fraud paradigm and where that should sit for these for these specific transactions. That's excellent.
Exactly right. And I mean, honestly, that's the reason why we've kind of built the way we've built, right? We've gone out and, whether it's in person or, so I mean, I'm in Amsterdam, right? I could spend an entire day today just buying from merchants that work with Adyen, in store, online, the shared ride that I asked for to come over here. Yeah, it's that sort of deep penetration that I think helps a lot. It's also one of the reasons we ended up, going for our banking licenses years ago. So it all kind of fits into this broader piece, which is, all these things work in conjunction to make a really nice, happy flywheel.
Yeah, owning the whole stack has been so powerful for Adyen. Now that you have the banking license, and congratulations on that, it's definitely not easy to get. Does this make accounts, capital, card issuing, real-time payouts simpler, more cost-effective? And does it mean that Adyen will be less dependent on stablecoin for treasury, considering and other fintech use cases?
It's a great question. Okay, so I think first thing I'll say is our banking licenses in the US, in the EU, and the UK already kind of give us real-time settlement and payout capabilities that solve a lot of the same problems that stablecoins are positioned to address for other fintechs, right? Things like cross-border speed, treasury efficiency, cost reduction, etc. So in that sense, I'd say yes, we're maybe a little bit less dependent on stablecoin infrastructure to solve those use cases because we already have the pipes built. However, we do watch the space quite carefully, especially for certain kind of B2B and or cross-border constraints where the economics are actually quite interesting and the infrastructure is maturing. So it's not really an ideological position. It's more about, as we look at it use case by use case, we're ultimately pretty much agnostic as to what the underlying technology is. So if it makes sense, I think it's something we'd be.
If it's certain countries, certain exchange rates, stablecoin could make sense, and then Adyen's going to serve that as the best option.
Totally.
And do you see stablecoin transactions via agents being an important thing as well?
Yeah, another excellent question. So one, like I reserve the right to change my mind on all of this stuff
Yeah,
because these
we
things
won't
seem
hold you to it.
yeah, perfect. Okay. So if I go back to those four buckets we talked about at the beginning of this, right? For consumer human in the loop purchases, especially in developed markets, I don't really see a use case in the near term for stable coins to get on there, right? Whether it's the card networks or any of the other ways that shoppers already like to pay all over the world, I think those work quite nicely for those use cases. More or less, I kind of feel the same way even for consumer autonomous flows, right? If I'm sitting in the US, I like getting my points. I like to be able to do chargebacks if I need to. Uh, I like going into my, Chase Sapphire Lounge at JFK before my next flight. Why would I give up on any of those things, right? When you start to get to the third bucket, the machine to machine bucket, that's where I think some of these stablecoin pieces do start to get a little bit more interesting, right? When you start to think about things like, microtransactions or very high velocity transactions, all of a sudden, perhaps now there is something that a stablecoin can do. I'm not yet, I don't have super high conviction though that card networks can't also try to solve that or solve that in a way that might work between things like batching and other things along those lines. On the B2B side, yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there for stablecoins to start to come in and figure it out. So yeah, I think it'll be really, really interesting over the course of the next few years to see how that starts to happen. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a roundabout answer, but that's
No,
kind of,
no, I think it makes total sense. Like,
what do you think? What's your take?
well, I agree. Like an agent or like a company isn't going to benefit from getting enough Amex points to go to the first class lounge. So what's the incentive there for them? And then for especially transactions that are happening cross border, if stable coins can make that so much more efficient and cheaper and faster, then why wouldn't they use it? Like that's kind of like where my head's at. But that said, it is nascent and we don't have the controls in place that make it easy to do a chargeback or talk to someone and like get something reversed, etc. So there's that risk to it as well.
I think probably one of the big drivers will be like how much like a human is this agent really acting. So what I mean by that first use case, consumer human in the loop, it is a full human. The second one, consumer autonomous, it still wants to make decisions the way you make decisions, right? It's just acting as an agent on your behalf. So, you might still want it. As you start to get away from that though, right? Machine to machine and B2B, totally agree. I think there's lots of other things that these agents might optimize for down the road.
Great. So we're nearly at time. Last few questions. So, we talked a lot about Adyen's competitive advantage by building everything in house. And I had lunch at your New York office the other day, actually, with Supreet, who I used to work with at Plaid.
Nice. Oh, excellent.
Yeah. And she was saying that Adyen, for the first time ever, made M&A activity. So she told me about Talon.one, and then like later that week, I saw the announcement of Orb. So are we going to see more acquisition activity from Adyen?
I'll stay in my own lane on that question. I won't speak too much, but maybe I can talk a little bit about them as well. One, I think both these acquisitions I think make a ton of sense on their own, right? But when you start to look at it through the lens of agentic commerce and the problems that need to be solved at scale, it all starts to come together a little bit, right? So I mentioned I'll go on a little ramble here. I mentioned at the beginning, right? We spoke to hundreds of merchants as we were building this, right? Every step of the way, we were working with merchants to figure out what are you excited about, what are you afraid about, and there were kind of three big things that came up every time. The one that we heard on every single conversation was this fear of disintermediation, where hey, I'm a merchant or a brand, I might spend tens or hundreds of millions of dollars every single year on customer acquisition and on marketing and on developing a deep and emotional connection between me as a brand and my shopper on the other side. I don't want there to be some AI platform that now entirely owns that relationship. What's the other side of the coin to disintermediation? it's loyalty, right? That's where Talon One starts to come in, right? Talon One addresses loyalty and promotions, right? I've already talked about merchant control. I've already talked about disintermediation. Loyalty ends up being the mechanism by which merchants are able to start to win repeat relationships, even if that first transaction happens via some sort of AI agent. So Talon One ultimately, we think, will end up giving merchants the tools to build and manage those relationships and not totally abdicate the customer relationship to these AI platforms. On the Orb side, Orb really starts to come into the world of usage-based billing, right? As commerce becomes more agentic and more dynamic, the billing models that sit underneath businesses will need to start to become a little bit more flexible, right? Static pricing doesn't always work in a world where an AI agent is starting to make these purchases. Or if you think about some of these new business models around, charging for, based on usage for API access or for digital content or anything like that, you now will need help figuring out how much to charge and when to charge and how that's all going to end up working. And I think that's where Orb will become really, really interesting. And I think what's most important here is both of these products are genuinely valuable today, even before agentic commerce reaches scale, right? Talon One is the best-in-class loyalty infrastructure for enterprises today. Orb is the best-in-class billing orchestration engine as well today. So regardless of how things go with agentic, and as you can tell, like it's something I'm quite bullish on, even leaving that aside, they're also solving real-world problems that our merchants are facing today and will only become more powerful in the future.
That makes so much sense. To be honest, when I first saw it, I was a bit like question mark of like, well, why those two companies? But yeah, the loyalty piece, because it's going to increase lifetime value of customers and we need to be ready for that in an agentic world. And the Orb piece with billing makes total sense. Like when I was a VC, we did like a lot of work in the CFO tech stack space and Orb and Metronome and Sequence and like all of those type companies. And so now I can see like why they're becoming so much more valuable. So thanks. That was like very, very helpful explanation. Okay, we're actually over time now. So I'll just wrap up with like the one question I ask all guests because I'm very interested in what these amazing people I get to interview read. So what are your favorite books? One personal, can be fiction or nonfiction, and one professional.
Okay, cool. Personally, I love historical fiction. So I think probably I'd say Lonesome Dove or The First Man in Rome, both excellent reads. Professionally, I read this book a few years ago called Range, and I loved it because it was like confirming all of my own biases about myself. So it's like, it basically says like don't hate on being a generalist, do more, like cultivate interests that are outside of your lane and it'll just end up translating. So those are my actually 3 picks I gave you.
Awesome. Great. I can't wait to read them. And that's all we have time for. So thank you so much, Karan. This was a really awesome conversation. I learned so much and I'm excited that the listeners get to learn from you as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me on the show.